Hello everyone, welcome back to my little YouTube series about the process of getting a book deal, writing a book, putting a book out into the world, all things book. Today's episode I thought we could focus a little bit more on how it works with traditional publishing from the point that you get the offer of the deal or start kind of going out to the publisher right through to the actually starting writing the book and planning out your time once you've got that deal. We got the offer on October 6th. And that was basically, my agent called me up and said, we've got a publisher who's interested. I got really excited. I think I cried after I got off the phone. I think Laura actually probably thought I was a bit uninterested because when I'm like really excited, I sometimes get quite quiet. So I think she was a bit like, do you want to write this book or not? It was a very emotional day for me. I was thrilled. I'm not even sure how I can describe how I felt. But I didn't have all the details. So at that point, Laura had phoned me up and said, okay, this is what the advance is going to be. This is the name of the publisher, what kind of stuff they're looking for. Here are the concerns that they've kind of said, but this is what they're saying. Do you want me to go for it? Or do you want me to negotiate this? Or what do you want to do? You know, she was sort of saying, it's up to you, but I think we should go for it. And there was then a bit of back and forward where Laura and the publisher were negotiating a few different things. I didn't really have much of a part in that because, well, A, I didn't know how any of it works, so it wouldn't be very helpful for me to be there. But B, that is your role of your agent, right? Your agent is representing you and your interests and making sure that the publisher is giving you the best possible offer they can. The offer that I got was for UK and World English rights, or World English rights, I guess UK is part of World English, minus US and Canada. So English in every country in the world except US and Canada. It's part of the game, I guess, of publishing, or part of the process of the sale of publishing, is about selling your rights at different times. So you can get basically a new deal for every new form of rights. You go through the same process. So like right now we're trying to sell our US rights for the same book, even though I've already written it. After that, we'll be doing translation rights, you know, translation into French or into Spanish or Chinese or whatever. So I still own all those rights except the World English ones that my publisher has bought. That's kind of how the deal works. It's they're buying the right to publish your book in a particular market or in a particular format or so on and so forth. Something that I didn't really understand, which I kind of want to explain a little bit, is about how advances work. When you say you get an advance, it is an advance. It's an advance on sales. I kind of think of it like a deposit. So essentially the amount of money that the publisher promises to you to get the rights to publish your book in whatever market, you essentially have to sell enough books to make up that money to basically pay them back for the advance before you then start making a profit on sales. And it's not the case of like, say for instance, you get a £10,000 advance, you have to sell £10,000 worth of books. If all the books are £10, you're suddenly like, oh, that's only 1,000 books, that's fine. But it doesn't work like that. It works based on the percentage of the sale of the book that you get as an author. And when you go through traditional publishing, your percentage that you get is really, really small. On average, you probably get about 10% of the sale of a book. So if your book is £10, you get £1. Or if one book sells and it costs £10, you make £1 against your advance. So if you have a £10,000 advance, you have a £10 book, you get a 10% commission basically for every sale, and your publisher gets 90%. You have to sell 10,000 books in order to make up, or as it said, earn out your advance. When people talk about advances, it's kind of key to understand that you get that money, but it's not as well as all the sales. You still have to earn that out before you then make money on sales of books. You also have to take into account the commission of your agent. So the sort of average for an agent is they take between like 12 to 15% of your earnings. If we use the same analogy, you have a £10 book, your publisher is taking 90% commission, you take 10% commission, your agent takes say 15% of yours. So if you have a £10 book, you essentially make £1 minus all of the publisher amounts off 15%, so then you make 85 pence. So for £10 book, you make 85 pence. I didn't know this beforehand, or at least I didn't. I knew that going through a traditional publisher meant that you don't make very much money on the sales of your book if you earn out your advance. But I didn't quite know it was that much, so I wanted to share that. I mean, this is information all online, the sort of averages and whatnot. Every book deal is different, but those are the sort of standard. This is also part of the reason why self-publishing is growing, because a lot of people don't like this, and I can understand why. Particularly from the perspective of it is a lot of money that goes to a publisher. But at the end of the day, they're the ones distributing your books. Having a traditional publisher is one of the best ways to get your books in bookstores, unless you kind of become an Amazon phenomenon, or you're just interested in making money off books, in which case, just self-publish. But if you want to get into charts, if you want to kind of be known as an author outside of kind of the niche that you're publishing in, I think for me personally, the decision to go traditional made a lot of sense. Okay, so we got the offer of the deal on October 6th. I was abroad when we got it, so we didn't get the first meeting in with my new editor at the publisher until I think it was at the end of October. In that time, we got the contract finalised. Laura, my agent, did more of the sort of negotiating around what precisely was going to go in the contract. There was a lot of back and forth, and then we finally had the meeting, kicked things off end of October. I think I actually didn't sign the contract until after that meeting, now that I think about it, but I can't really remember. At that point, we knew what the terms were and we were sort of ready to get going. So went for this meeting with my publisher, and it was basically a case of just asking a lot of questions and working out what the plan was. The biggest takeaway I had for that meeting was, it was kind of just up to me to go and write this book now. I wasn't really going to be getting much more help, or obviously they were there to email and I could, send samples, be like, what do you think of this, and all that sort of thing. But I was kind of shocked by this idea of like, oh, it's now just up to me to go write 80,000 words and send them back to you at a specified deadline. There was no other kind of stuff to be done. I don't really know what I was expecting, but I felt like I couldn't get going until the publisher had sort of said, yeah, go for it. But really he was like, yeah, we've already done the deal, like it's yours, go. So I was like, oh. So the sort of things we discussed in that meeting kind of ironed out was, for instance, submission deadline, when I had to actually hand the book, the manuscript, over to the publisher. And that is a relatively final version of your book. You obviously then go through a lot of editing with the publisher, but you have to be happy with what you've sent in, because it is essentially your final version. It isn't a case of that being the first draft. You've probably done many drafts before you hand that in. As you can imagine, thinking up an idea, working out the idea, getting to the crux of it, doing all the research, and then writing 80,000 words is quite a long project, a lot of stuff to do. I was given a June 30th deadline. As I say, the meeting was at the end of October, so I essentially had 8 months to do all of that, which at the time I was like, yeah, that's really doable. 8 months, that's ages. I think next time I might ask for a little bit more time. So we got that, the timeline. We had a big chat about the title, because we were not happy with the title at all. There was a lot of brainstorming around the title. The title that we even released the press release with was Science Friction was the title we went for. It changed like 3 times after that. Now the final title is Smoke and Mirrors. Maybe I'll do a whole video on how titles change. But anyway, it was a lot of process trying to work that out, and a lot of toing and froing. So that was one thing that we kind of talked about in that first meeting. We also spoke about things like what genre the book was likely to fall into. I was really big on it not being thought of just as a popular science book. It obviously has a lot of science in it, but I think if you're the sort of person who really, really loves popular science book, I'm not saying you'd be disappointed with my book. I think I would hope you'd still really enjoy it, but there's a lot of like politics, economics, history, philosophy in the book as well. So I think of it more as a sort of smart thinking, big idea, non-fiction, whatever you want to call it, book. So we had a big discussion about how do we position it so that it fits into like science, technology, business, economics maybe. So that was something that we discussed really, really early on, and we're agreed on that angle. It was really important to me that my publisher agreed with me on that, because that was one of the things that was most important to me, is how people thought of the book. One example, for instance, was the publisher suggested we could release on International Women's Day or on Ada Lovelace Day, one of the Women in STEM days, and that immediately I didn't want to do that. I was like, it's important for me not to be thought of as a female author, but as an author. Lots of people think that's a really good angle, and it is a good angle for some people, but for me that wasn't right. So getting all of those kind of conversations up front and clear before I started going was really, really important. And I think now I'm so glad that we had those conversations then, because I think it would be awkward trying to have them now when we're starting to send press releases and starting to write blurbs and all that stuff. So I would say that's super important to get up front, is having a real idea of what is your sell, what is your pitch, how do you want people to perceive you, how do you want people to perceive your book, where on a bookshelf does it sit. I went into Waterstones and foils and onto Amazon and looked at all the different genres and was like, where would my book sit? Like, where does it actually go? Trying to iron out all those sorts of things really early on was important. And so once we kind of had that meeting, it was a case of just go. It was like, off you go, 80,000 words, send it in 8 months' time, email us anytime you want if you have any questions. but nothing left to do now. That was extremely nerve-wracking, but also very exciting, but extremely daunting, because I had this kind of vague sample chapter that I knew I wasn't really happy with. I had my proposal, I had a publisher being like, yep, we like it, this is the angle we want to do. And I immediately was like, okay, I need to somehow work out how I'm going to fit in a whole load of interviews with people, working out what the structure of this book is, working at my point, actually finding time to write it, whilst also paying my bills all at the same time. A key thing to kind of know about how advances work as well is you don't get it all up front. So even if you get a really good advance, it doesn't always pay for your time immediately because it gets paid in thirds. So you get a third of it when you sign your deal, and then you get the next third after you've submitted your manuscript to legal. So not even the first submission. It has, it might already have edits and then go to legal, and then you get your final tranche when the book actually gets published. For me, it was like, I'm going to have to still do a bit of freelancing. I'm going to still have to make sure I am earning enough. I was okay for a long time, but I wanted to make sure I could take time off to actually focus on write at the end of the process. So for me, it was making sure I was earning enough to kind of pay for 6 months ahead. But the way I sort of structured my time, just roughly between October and December, was organising lots of interviews with people, having 2-hour long Skype meetings, hangouts, phone calls, meeting people in person, travelling to meet people, getting all of those because I was interviewing a lot of scientists and a lot of academics and journalists and all different kinds of people. That was the main focus in those months. I was still working my regular freelance job quite hard in those months. January and February, still doing a lot of interviews, but started focusing on how to actually structure the book. So going back through all the interviews and pulling out all of the strands. March through April and into May was the shitty first draft, as it's called, which essentially for me was like bullet pointing the chapters. June, all of June, May, June, and in the end a little bit into July, because I submitted 2 weeks after the deadline because there was a few things that got held back, was basically just writing every day, except for days that I maybe had something else on, but almost every day it was sitting here in my flat, head down, up at 6 o'clock in the morning, right through to 10, 11, even midnight some nights, trying to massage it into a book through many different edits. For a lot of people, the idea of writing a book means having to give up a lot of other things, and I won't kind of dress it up and say, oh, you can, it doesn't take that much time, whatever. It takes a lot of time, especially if you have a deadline that was quite tight, like mine was 8 months, which was quite an intense project that I took on for that time and really focused on it. That was kind of, even though I was still doing freelance work, it was my main job. And that was kind of how I treated it. So I think for this video, I kind of want to cover the early part of the getting the deal, as well as the sort of general timeline of that 8 months that I had between getting the deal and having to submit the book. Obviously in future videos, I'm going to go into much more about the actual narrative, how I actually worked out the narrative, how I structured my time writing. I did a lot of traveling while I was writing. I want to talk a bit about that and how I structured that. Again, if you have any further questions about this sort of early process with the deal, advances, publishers, agents, pop them down in the comments, and I'll do a Q&A video at some point in a couple of weeks and see if we can get that out and answer some questions. Hopefully that's enough of the admin of books, and I'm excited to kind of get on to the how you actually write one. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you on the next video.